Astrophysical Directions. So in this section, I'd like to introduce you to several of the more advanced considerations and techniques that involve cosmic structure. And I'd like to share with you some of my own questions, ones that have occurred to me over the years. So let me make it clear that it's often been very difficult for me to come to feel that I understand much of the information presented here. And this is due, at least in the beginning, to an almost complete ignorance on my part of astronomy years ago and of mathematics in general, as along with a deep feeling of insecurity about technical issues in general. So this required that I go over and over simple facts until I felt that I understood what they signified, what they meant. And this learning experience has been, for me at least, a personal odyssey of real value, immense value, and also a kind of high adventure. And as for the astronomy, don't expect to absorb what astrologers have made a point of avoiding for centuries in just a few days. Take time, and take time to develop a feel for this material. Don't worry about, what it all means for the present. The outer space surrounding our birth is filled with countless stars and objects. These objects, whose sheer numbers may boggle our mind, can all be ordered according to the fabric or system to which they belong or are members. And an understanding of the basic matrix or fabric in which these objects are nested or embedded will simply bypass the need to try to interpret them one by one, like in some attempt to somehow count and interpret all the stars in the sky. Good luck. Astrologers have lost much of the grasp that they once had on astronomy and on the mathematics of their field. In past centuries, as any history book will demonstrate, 400 years ago, so astrologers were both astronomers and mathematicians. They held a very responsible place in society, a position that was respected and one that provided a reasonable living. Astrology in our times, in my time at least, as I look around in this country, is generally held in low esteem, and the individuals practicing it are made to feel, in some ways, shame for charging money for their skills. To my mind, there may well be a direct connection between the state of our art, astrology, and the gradual loss of the more physical or scientific part of our art, the astronomy and the math. I've spent many years investigating the heliocentric system of event expression, by itself, but also in relation to our traditional geocentric astrology chart and concepts. They go together. There's two different views. And this has involved not only doing, many tens of thousands of charts, but also a great many individual readings in person, in which both geocentric and heliocentric charts were consulted. Now, what I'm going to talk about here, what follows here, is not pure speculation, but it kind of has emerged to my attention through many years of study. Let me recount to you, at least in brief, how I got into investigating the larger life of our solar system, which would be called heliocentric astrology. In the beginning, I was propelled in this direction by an increasing dissatisfaction with the results of existing astrological techniques in which I was brought up. Remember, this is before computers and so on. And also, I kind of like the thrill of the unknown, of going where no one has gone. After I got over the newness of heliocentric charts, and the extreme discomfort I felt of not having familiar landmarks like the moon or the houses or the chart angles to guide me, it slowly dawned on me that the helioplanetary patterns, in particular what I have come to call whole chart configurations, where you have several major aspects that combine to form a whole gestalt, or 360-degree picture, I found that they represented our zodiac in a purity or at a level of significance that I had never before encountered. This is a long time ago. After several years of this kind of work, during which much of my geocentric astrological activity was kind of suspended, I attempted to return to Earth, so to speak, and to at least begin to combine the heliocentric astrology with the traditional geocentric techniques. It was then that I encountered a singularity, a life-changing problem, because it became quite clear to me that the zodiac, or ecliptic, whether expressed through helio or geocentric planetary positions, was heliocentric or sun-centered, in essence. It's a much less, quote, mundane, unquote, plane of reference than I could remember it being. So let me restate this. It's hard to say what I'm saying. When first venturing into heliocentric research, I had assumed that I was moving from the very practical and specific methods of geocentric standard traditional astrology, perhaps to a more, quote, spiritual, unquote, generic, a higher level or order of information, the solar system, helio. And this was, in fact, the case. But an unexpected side result was my growing awareness that our traditional geocentric sphere, all of our centuries of standard astrology chart, all of our zodiac concerns, was also of a very high or spiritual, maybe you can use psychological if you rather, of a spiritual nature, and much less the nitty-gritty, down-to-earth exact affair that I had assumed or remembered that astrology was before I started studying helio. You can't go home again is what I'm really saying. You don't go backward. If you expand to a greater consciousness, you see in a greater way, but you don't ever go back to a more narrow one. So a different and stark understanding of myself and of my fellow astrologers began to occur to me. One in which I could see that I had been and I was much less practical and very much more of a dreamer than I could ever have before admitted. As part of this experience I'm talking about, I began to see that astrologers as a group had somehow let lapse or lost almost all of their means to specify or communicate their vision to the general public. In particular, they no longer understood, for example, the equatorial or horizon systems of coordinates and planes, even though without them, a standard astrological chart could never be constructed. So, modern astrologers have little idea what these auxiliary coordinate systems are, much less how they might be interpreted. And this is particularly true for the heliocentric chart. Anyway, everything began to flip-flop for me in this new learning experience. And by that point, this learning experience had become what I would call a waking vision. As an astrologer, I had a built-in thirst. A love for such powerful or sensitive zodiac points as the ascendant, the midheaven, the vertex, and of course the house cusps. In fact, like many astrologers, I long to find and extract in my astrology even more such meaningful points from the zodiac itself. So the long and the short of it is that until that time, it had never occurred to me that the specificity of these sensitive points, like the ascendant, the midheaven, were provided not by the zodiac alone, but by the horizon and equatorial planes, just as much as by the zodiac. In other words, it's the plane of the horizon that marks out the specific degree of my ascendant from the other 360 possible degrees. I had unconsciously given all credit for any of this ability or power of astrology to the zodiac alone, and none to the horizon. In truth, I hardly even knew what the horizon was, other than perhaps as a complicated diagram in an astronomy book. And I gradually began to see that astrologers have let lapse their conscious use and any awareness of these other coordinate planes. Although all three systems, zodiac, equatorial, and horizontal, have to be used to calculate every last natal chart. I found that I had been trying to induce, and this is my point, I've been trying to extract all meaning in astrology from the familiar zodiac by itself alone, which is similar to trying to climb out of the middle of a deep lake when we feel the need for some dry land. And I'm not alone in this. Astrologers have, for some centuries, now lost the ability to deliver the kind of very specific information that's available through mastery and conscious use of the equator and the horizon system of coordinates. And instead, we have, and maybe I can say they have now because I've kind of changed, we've clung to the vestiges of such specificity as found in the ascendant and house cusps, etc. The public's demand for such specific has been satisfied in our times more by the psychic or the intuitive gifts of modern astrologers rather than by the use of any comprehensive and conscious astrological technique. I know this is pretty complicated. I guess it boils down to that if astrologers live in specific poverty, which a lot of them do, in my experience, and I've known thousands of them, it's because they refuse to master the means to get the attention of this very result-oriented world. And this means is available to them perhaps only through the reacquisition of the lost branches of their own art, which are astronomy and mathematics. If astrologers do have a holistic and a spiritual message to deliver in these times, they're somehow going to have to get more public attention, and not just through their intuition alone, but also through dependable and predictable results. In other words, we got to deliver. And so this book that I originally wrote, which was called Astrophysical Directions, and now I'm calling it the Astrology of Space, is intended to reintroduce astrologers to their own astronomical heritage. Now, the book goes on, but it gets increasingly specific. It talks about where all these objects are and gives you a way of locating them in your natal chart. I'm not going to try to do that in a video like this. I suggest that you simply go and download a free ebook called The Astrology of Space from a couple of URLs. One URL would be dharmagrooves.com, just dharmagrooves.com, or spiritgrooves, one word, .net. There's lots of material there, lots of other videos, but that book would have a great deal of information if you've liked what you've heard so far. Thanks.